do recognize is that society is something that incorporates both. So when we say art, literature, and society, it is not that they are separate entities, but are constituents that make up uh, society. And in a way, it is society which contributes to the making of art and literature. I'd like to start with an example from the world of music. 5 years ago, a musician called David Bowie passed away. David Bowie was, in my own experience, when I was school at school, I David Bowie, and I considered him to be one of the many musicians that was part of the Western pop scene. However, gradually I came to realize that he was not just one of many, but an extremely influential musician. And in that, he uh, created a transition between the
classical and music
found in the 60s. I'd like to give you an example in the
I
sense
request
that
all
in the
participants
1960s,
to please mute yourselves.
Kaushik Medhi, please mute yourself. Kaushik.
so in the 1960s, we have the emergence of the very popular pop group Beatles in the United Kingdom, and Bob Dylan started singing in the United States. We know that Bob Dylan won the Literature Nobel in the 21st century. But David Bowie, I'm going to come back to David Bowie. David Bowie was seen as someone who created a different kind of music, in the sense that his orchestration, his ornamentation, his sounds were that was a world that was completely different. That means David Bowie in 1970 and David Bowie in 2015 was a very different figure. The world had changed. The world had become very, very technologically different. In one of the essays published by Simon Critchley. Simon Critchley is a philosopher. So Simon Critchley has stated that David Bowie's influence is immense, in the sense that he could actually anticipate the changes in society musically. How do we understand that? Last year, that is 2020, last year, a book was published called The Lost Children Archive by a Mexican writer, Valeria Luiselli. Now, in that book, Valeria Luiselli writes of a character, a small boy and a girl. They are going on a drive across America. The whole novel is like a road novel, a family going out on a journey. And the boy and the girl, they keep on listening to David Bowie. So what we get to see is that David Bowie provided generations of listeners a kind of an understanding of life from the other side. Because what we as we know that we all of us have our everyday lives. We wake up in the morning, we have our routines, we have a breakfast, our lunch, we go to work, we do things, we are engaged in professions, our relationships. That's our everyday life. But in this everyday life, there are certain interventions. It may come in different forms. We may be traveling by bus, we may be listening to some songs played on the bus, we come back. Or we could be looking at certain other things, maybe looking at a poster. It may be a movie poster, it may be something that is there on the street, it may be some kind of an extract, a page torn apart. That becomes part of our lives, it's packaged. So this intervention, or let's say the interpenetration of different cultural items that enter our lives without us really recognizing, is something that is very, very fascinating. And cultural theorists, people who are students of culture, have highlighted how these things actually become part of our lives without even us knowing them. How our habits change. We follow icons, we follow people, we follow different tastes, and habits develop. So I'd like to give you another example for how this happens. For instance, in the 1860s, so we are now in the 21st century. If we go to the middle of the 19th century, in the 1860s, there was a French writer called Emile Zola. Now, Emile Zola was, by the 1860s, he was already very popular. So Emile Zola decided, no, I am going to write a grand novel, and a grand novel having many, many parts. So he decided that he would write a novel which would have 10 different sections, 10 novels into one novel of one family. Now, his design, that he thought that the family is actually the basic structure of society. That if I'm going to write about a family, then I can actually portray society. This idea that a family is the nucleus of society, it is family which holds a society together, that we are actually a composite structure of multiple families. This idea we find reflected in different literary texts. For instance, in the very, very famous novel by Leo Tolstoy, Anna Karenina, he talks about family. The first sentence is about family. He says, all happy families are alike and all unhappy families are unhappy in their own way. So he tries to find a register through which the literary world of one family is one family. But then when we encounter that family, we get to see certain things which are common to us and certain things which are different. The idea, therefore, is that what we call society is in a way reflective of the kind of person we actually are. For instance, when we say society, society is something which can be seen as very fluid. For instance, if I say my society, which would include people that I know, people that I interact with, the market that I go to, the music that I listen, the books that I read, the food that I like. So that will be part of my society. I go to a particular restaurant, I wear a particular dress, I have my choices. So these microcosms of interaction, my tastes are developed by the people I meet, the books I read, the people I talk to, the conversations I make, the tastes that come, the internet that I watch. All of these things may go into the making of who I am. And without realizing, people like me and people like you and people, all of us, we are actually contributing to the making of society. So it is a two-way process. It's not like that society influences who I am. I'm also in a way influencing how society is being seen, not only by me, but also by others. For instance, one of the interesting things in all this is the taste. The Enlightenment philosopher David Hume talked about taste. What is taste? When I say you have great taste, when I say, oh, you don't have taste, what does it mean? That means in an essay called The Standard of Taste, that we actually try to program our understanding of society in terms of what appeals to us. I would say this is bad music. I would say this is a bad picture. I would say this is a bad movie. What is behind my sense of judgment? How do I arrive at my sense of judgment? It has to do with my upbringing, my culture, my society, the languages I know and speak and understand, my exposure. From that perspective, and try to understand the world from that perspective. So that becomes my world. So I would say this is how things are. But it is not necessary that this is how things are for everyone, because someone else will have a different perspective and a different point of view based on how that person is located and how that person sees things. So for an American, youth, David Bowie may be very important, but for someone located here, that person may not be important. We may not even someone may not even have heard of David Bowie. So it's not necessary when we talk of society or when we talk of social structure, the same structure will be applicable everywhere. So in particularized components, societies are different. Social behaviors are different, mores are different, traditions and customs are different. So when we read different literatures, when we read, say, for instance, a Japanese novel or Japanese poetry, we encounter a world which is very different from ours. It's a world that is not familiar. Language is not familiar. Their food habits are not familiar. Their routines, the way they conduct themselves, the way they interact, their families are different from us. So what we find is that societies are different when it comes to particularized components. There's something to be learned by knowing of other societies. In a way, I am a carrier of my society. You are a carrier of your society. So when I carry myself and go to a place like, say, Afghanistan, and I go and meet people, I look at people, I look at the dress, their habits, their timetable, then I see, okay, they're different from me. And I also locate certain similarities. I would say, okay, this is also how we eat. This is how we talk. These are things we follow. So this combination of variation and similarity, this is something that we can encounter and come to know about through literature and art. So literature and art actually serve as the register of interaction. If I can interact with someone, if I can talk to someone, I can do that not by saying everyone is the same, but by recognizing difference. And in that difference, I try to come to terms with who I am. So if I read a novel, or if I watch a movie, or if I look at a portrait, or if I go and watch a play, and if I find that that play is telling something which I don't recognize, which, oh, I don't see things like that, that's fine. Because what I recognize is that there are societies which are very different from mine. That recognition is extremely important. And that recognition enables me to see who I am and my society, not only better, but also to understand the way societies can enable others to know. This fertilization of knowledge, so to come to know the other, someone who is different from who I am, someone who operates differently, that knowledge is essential to furthering human understanding, not only of who I am as an individual, but also the societies we live in. It's important to recognize, therefore, that societies are constitutionally different from one another, because each society is made up of, if we go back to the example of Emile Zola, if he thought that societies are made up of families, and families then make communities, and communities then make societies. So uh, as Madam Dr. was talking about the point of view from anthropology, so when you look at social and cultural anthropology, and you take that perspective, we see that it is to go back to the example of E.B. Tyler, who defined culture as, what is culture? Culture is a way of life. So when you look at that it is a way of life, but ways of life are different for different people. And that recognition, that understanding can come, if not if we are ghettoized. If I say, okay, this is my world and I am comfortable with my world, that's fine. But as Evelyn Toffler wrote in one book, the title of the book is interesting. The title of the book is called Culture Shock. So when I have a culture shock, when can I have a culture shock? It is when I interact with someone I don't know. That person has maybe a different hairstyle. If I go to barber shop and I see a person who has a very different hairstyle, I'll say, what is this? What's this going on? This is the way to wear your hair. That person will say, that's fine. He'll laugh at me, I'll laugh at him. So this understanding of the other as being different, if I do not recognize that difference, if I do not see the person as being different, and if I say this is my world, then that will lead to a myopic comprehension of the world, in the sense that I'll say, okay, this is how things are. So instead of saying I am right, you are wrong, it's like saying I am right, you are also right. These are issues which are very significant, in the sense that they shape our understanding of society, art, and literature. To give you an example, if we look at art, if we look at different art forms, if you look at the 17th century and 18th century of the Western world, you'll find that there was a tendency to look at reality and present things as they appear. This is known as verisimilitude. That means if I'm a painter, if I'm an artist, I'm going to paint the tree as it appears. So there is a concept in art called still life. Okay, I'll take a vase, I'll take some apples and fruits, and I'll say I'll paint it as it is. So this was known as the naturalistic approach to life. I will paint as it appears, mimetic approach. But later on, in the 20th century, there are artists like Picasso who said, no, life is not always as it appears. Life is much more complex. Life is something which is fragmented, because I am made up of many selves. I am a person talking to you. I am a person who will have my own preferences. You as a person will have your own preferences. So there are certain intersecting points, but that is not the whole person. We are never the one person at all places or all times. So the recognition of that is something which requires multiple points of entry. If I say that this is how things are and this is how things appear, and if that is the end of the story, then there are a lot of things which I'll not know. So Picasso, for instance, or who were the cubists, they thought that art can be seen in terms of the structure of cubes. So they were of the opinion, they were of the view that life is very complex. And to represent that complexity, if we go back to the naturalistic mode, that this is a pond and I'm going to paint it like a pond, photographic reality, then there's many things here which I cannot represent. So painters like Edward Monet, for instance, they try to demonstrate that, okay, I'm going to bring in emotion into the painting. This is a big challenge. How do I bring my emotion into the painting? How can emotion is something that is very subjective. And a painting is something that will be visible and seen by everyone else. How am I going to bring that? So the Swedish painter Edvard Munch created a painter, very famous painting called The Scream. Okay, so there was this face which was a distorted face, and it was hardly a face, and the title of the painting was Scream. So art was therefore in the 20th century, I'm talking of painting, was responding to the nature of the changed world in terms of how it was seen by people. So art is a response to society, and society also responds to art, in the sense that in the 19th century, uh, as students of economics, we know there was this man called Thorstein Veblen, and Veblen wrote a book called The Theory of the Leisure Class. The idea was that people who have leisure, people who have ample time, they create fashion. And then people who don't have leisure then think, okay, this is the thing to follow. This is the kind of dress I'm going to wear. This is the hairstyle I'm going to have. So he said that there is an imitation effect that takes place in society in terms of what is seen by the people of the upper class. So he talks about a social hierarchy. And when there's a social hierarchy, then people at the top, then they control the lifestyles, the attitudes, the responses, the taste of the people. This idea was flattened when, because this creates a very pyramid-like structure, that there are people at the top and people at the bottom. But when, this is something which was there suggested by Veblen in the 19th century. But when you come to the 20th century, maybe say 80, 70 years from now, then the person who has absolutely nothing economically, politically, socially, has apparently nothing. That person also became the register of culture. If we look at the movies of Ritik Ghatak, for instance, if we look at Satyajit Ray, Pother Pachali, if you look at Bhavendranath Hoikia's movies, you will see that the so-called underclass of society, the underclass, not the upper class, the underclass of society finds representation. And they then shape art, they then shape the responses. So in a way, the parallel cinema movement in India of the 1970s and 80s, for instance, people like Shyam Benegal, Basu Chatterjee, Mrinal Sen, Satyajit Ray, they created an environment, cultural environment through which society could see things which otherwise remained invisible because they were too familiar. Okay, a young boy and a young girl running across the field to watch a train approach is something that was not considered to be the stuff of cinema. How can that be something important for cinema? But that is a revolutionary scene in the history of world cinema. Pother Pachali's opening scene, that there is this whole scene of the train coming and the smoke billowing out of it. Now, what therefore happens is that what Choudhury has done is something that the French philosopher Michel de Certeau has talked about. He has said that what is very common in every day, maybe a pillar that we see every day, that can be significant. So the nature of art and the connection it has in terms of how we interpret, not someone, a philosopher or an artist, but how we as individuals interpret. And we do this interpreting all the time. How do we interpret, for instance, the choices that we make? What brand am I going to buy? What's the color of my car? All of these things are actually interpretations in which we are socially and culturally engaged. We are interpreting. So we are not only looking at commodities, but the commodities also are controlling us. So this is being reflected in literature. What I have also seen that in the last 20 years of the 21st century, to come back to literature, if you're looking at the 21st century, in the 21st century, literature has completely taken a different turn. Till let's say, till the end of the 20th century, literature was looking at society in a very, very broad sense. There were questions of morality, identity, terrorism, militancy, conflict. But if I am to come to the literature of the last 10 years, maybe 5 years, or literature or books published, poetry, uh, or novels or plays that have been published in the last 5 years or 10 years, I see a very, very different turn. What is that turn? What has happened? What has happened in the last 10 years is that we now get very, very micro level understanding of society. We get studies such as juvenile crime. We get questions of uh, extreme forms of violence. We get different kinds of lonelinesses. We get people who are racist, things which were thought of being in the past, of people, different kinds of hatred, very micro level hatred, insularity growing, and very, very indefinable insecurities form the staff of literature now. And growing insecurities, fear, different kinds of fear. In the last 5 years, I have seen some outstanding work being done by new writers, which deal with the question of fear, anxiety, not anxiety in the psychological sense, not anxiety that has a rule book that can be understood or that can be explained, but anxieties which are very difficult to define, very difficult to understand, that an individual carries, and how that is controlled by technology. Technology has become a very integral part of literature now. You'll find in the last 10 years a lot of science fiction being written. So what is science fiction? Science fiction is not necessarily talking about the cosmos or talking of some kind of life in somewhere in the universe. Science fiction is the visualization of an alternative reality. Okay, there will be a character who is all the time involved in this video game, and that is his universe. He enters that world. He plays there. That is his universe. He makes his money, and all his friends are virtual friends. That is his world. So that reality, that society, we can't imagine a novel of 1930, 1950, 1960, or 70 dealing with such subject of a protagonist, of a hero, of a character who is so involved in the video game, in a virtual world, that is more real than the real world he inhabits. That is brought home to us. That is something that literature is trying to respond to. So when we look at society, the society is highly fragmented now in terms of how an individual responds to and situates and looks at life. So in that sense, this connection between art, literature, and society is something that makes us aware of how individualized we have become and how isolated lives have become. Even though we feel the technology connects us, the technology has brought us together, it also is a reminder of how loneliness, which was seen to be one of the great themes of literature and art 100 years ago, is continuing to be insisted more and more reflective of the world in which you live. That is, fragmentation has become a part of our existence. I think the time is 40 minutes, so I'll stop it here. It's almost time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
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 Sir, we feel extremely honored to have you amongst us. Being able to hear you is a privilege, and we are thankful to you for sparing some of your very valuable time to interact with us and enabling us to see how art, literature, and society are interconnected. Thanks a lot. Now, our HOD, Dr. Lanu Devi, will give us give her vote of thanks to sir. Lanu, ma'am.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, ma'am. We can hear you.
It was indeed a very good webinar, and I feel very happy that all the faculties of the humanities and social sciences, specifically from the program of English, they have organized a very nice webinar.